Wayne is a real people person coach. He's got just excellent skills in terms of how he manages people. Obviously, he understands the game tactically. When I look back and think that I did it by myself for a period, it's just like, oh my God, that's why I didn't sleep. Yeah, a first team analyst, that is brutal. And in all honesty, I don't think first team analysts are given the respect that they deserve. A head coach will think in the short term. We'll think about winning the next game and winning the league now. As a GM, you have to think more about the medium to long term. Oh my God, I could literally sit here for the next 3 days and try and explain the salary cap to you. So,
hello and welcome back to my channel, and it's time for another industry chat video, and today's guest is Lucy Rushton. So Lucy has most recently been the general manager of MLS side DC United, working with the likes of Wayne Rooney. So Lucy started out in England as more of an analyst and scout role at the likes of Watford and Reading, and then obviously made the move over to the MLS with firstly Atlanta and then most recently, as I've said, DC United. So really interested to chat to Lucy about her kind of career so far in terms of the progression from being an analyst. So I hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Lucy Rushton. Okay, Lucy Rushton, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
hey Chris, thank you for having me. I'm really good, thank you. So it's sunny and bright outside here in Virginia today, so always makes the mood a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely was. To be honest, it's just started raining and it's dark here, so it's not I'd
Oh, in
rather be where
England?
you
In
are.
England, it's raining? What?
Yeah, exactly. And the north of England as well. So I know you're probably not used to that, so it's even worse. So
This is the joys of living abroad in America.
yeah.
One of the benefits for sure.
So first of all, really appreciate you jumping on, Lucy. I've got loads of questions to kind of ask you and kind of learn about your journey. So for those that don't know who you are, if you want to just give yourself a little bit of an introduction and kind of what you've been up to over the last couple of years, really.
Yeah, sure. So, Lucy Rushton, my name, and say born and bred in Reading, in England, and spent the majority of my career as a performance analyst there at Reading Football Club, before moving over to America to work in MLS. God, 7 years ago now. Can't believe how long that's been. But yeah, 7 years ago, I moved across to MLS to work for Atlanta United, and then, coming up to 2 years ago, moved to DC United as general manager. So I left my role there in October, just gone, 2021. Oh no, 22. We're in 23 now, so 2022. And yeah, just looking for the next challenge and biding my time in Virginia here.
Perfect. So we'll give a shout out to Amber as well, the mutual connection, because again, I've had Amber on the channel and she mentioned you, and obviously we'll get into the kind of point where you two work together, obviously Reading, as you mentioned. So if you just want to kind of quickly go back to the start then, Lucy, really. So kind of, how did you get into analysis? You've kind of got a scouting and recruitment background more so from what I can tell. So where, how did that kind of come about in the initial place?
Yeah, so my recent history is more in scouting and recruitment. I am an analyst by trade, I guess. It's where I started. Really funky way of getting into it. I did my undergrad at Reading University in kind of like sports like leadership kind of thing. And my dissertation, one of my lecturers on my course was doing her PhD in notational analysis, which this was back in like 2007, I think, maybe even earlier, 2006. And so it's totally like new then, really pro zone match view of three kind of days. And she said, oh, you should kind of do a little kind of side project to my thesis on your dissertation, because she was doing it in football and she knew I love football. So I did it, and just so happened that our external examiner for the dissertation was a lecturer at the University of Wales Institute Cardiff in sports performance analysis. He read my dissertation, was like, oh, you should come and do the masters in sports performance analysis. And I was like, what? That exists as a career? Like that's a thing? Like you can get a job from that? And it was a totally new concept to me. Kind of thought it was well above my head, if I'm being honest, in terms of the complexities of the maths and the science of it all. But went and done my master's in sports performance analysis at UWIC and got some work experience while I was there with Cardiff Academy, Cardiff City Academy, and yeah, kind of just snowballed from there really after I graduated, obviously again getting my first opportunity. So yeah, it was a funny way. Just I always look back and think, God, what if that person had not been my external moderator on my dissertation, like would never have known about it.
No, that is crazy how it does work out sometimes like that. So the first kind of role, I'm just on your LinkedIn profile as well, Lucy, at the time. So you've got down Watford. So was that after you graduated from your masters then, the Watford up?
Yeah. So that was my first real kind of full-time job in professional football, and it was as a recruitment analyst. So really about using data to try and identify players and using data to then assess the players that you had identified. And back at I think that was 2007 I started there. And back then that was like pretty cutting edge in terms of pretty cutting edge in terms of using data and that whole concept around kind of using that in the scouting process as a filtering means. So I was there. Mick Court kind of took me in there, and Mick is now, like, to me, he's just like an absolute guru when it comes to analysis. So he gave me a lot of confidence. I was very lucky to work with him in the period I did, because he just kind of opened my eyes to analysis and the ways of the world around it and everything. So I got a good education from him. But then quickly got an opportunity to go to Reading, I think it's about 7 months after being at Watford. So I wasn't there that too long.
Yeah. So in terms of obviously working in the men's game, then did you get, was it ever a problem for you with it? And I'm presuming it's hopefully progressed since then in terms of, were you getting much kickback from, working in the men's game as a woman?
It's funny. Like, I think when I went to Reading as a first team analyst, I think I was, pretty much the first and only female in that position. In professional football, and it was weird. You always felt like a probably an extra need to kind of prove yourself or to get trust. I think to build trust at the start, I think you felt you had to go that little bit extra because you just have to get over that hurdle of being a woman. But in all honesty, obviously, the people who gave me my jobs, so Mick Court at Watford, Nick Hammond, director of football at Reading at the time, and then Steve Coppell, who was the manager there. A.D. Boothroyd at Watford as well was the manager there. And I've been very lucky in those early instances that I had people, managers, coaches, directors of football who didn't make my gender an issue at all. And I think just gave me an openness to go in and show us. Come on, show us then. Like, we'll give you an opportunity, and if you can do the job, great. And it was really kind of just about taking that opportunity and building kind of and establishing trust and respect, I think, in the early days. I'm totally honest to say that then every time a new manager came in, you reset and you feel like, okay, there's a boundary to break here. He's probably never worked with a woman before in terms of this role. And so you probably have to break down that barrier again. So I think every time the manager changed or your job changed, like you feel like a little extra pressure. But again, just being very lucky with all the managers I worked with were just very inclusive, and all the players as well. That was a big thing. So like even at Reading, like within like a month of being there, the players would come to me and want to sit down and look at their video and ask me for my feedback on the game. And it just gave you confidence straight away that you belonged. And so, I have to say that from my perspective, I've had a lot of positive experiences. Of course, there have been times when you've gone for jobs and not got it, and it's because of being a woman. You can just feel it. You feel it in the room. They don't need to tell you. You just know. But you have to just look on those and just kind of understand that maybe there's an ignorance or it's just not meant to be. So it has got better and it hasn't got better. Like, I don't think it's really changed in terms of. I mean, certainly the number of women in the game is still probably equally as low as it was back then in terms of this role and analysis positions. Like, I think you get a lot of women now who are maybe in the medical side of the game. But for me, it's just all about kind of just having a confidence in yourself and building trust. We all have to build trust, right? We all have to, whenever we go into a role, especially in football, you have to gain the trust and respect of your colleagues. So I don't see it being any different in that respect as a woman.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because obviously going back to when I started out, even obviously as not a woman, it was a case of you do feel like you have to prove yourself, and when you first, you've just come out of university, you are a bit apprehensive, and are they taking me seriously and all that. So I'd imagine that would be a hell of a lot more difficult being a woman. So yeah, you've obviously done right over the course of the years, though, Lucy. You've gone on to some good roles. So were there many female people on the master's course when you did that, Lucy? Because there's more courses now, and I do see more people on on LinkedIn and stuff. There's a lot more people that are doing coaching and analysis, more women doing that. So I think there will be more jobs, but I think the percentage as a whole is probably still obviously a long way to go from ideal.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I mean, on my course, there were very few women on it at the time. That demographic has probably changed a little bit, but even the women who were in it on my course were not on it for football. They were on it for women's sports. I think that's probably changed, obviously, with the change in the women's game. Because I think, when I was studying, women playing football in England, there was no professional female players in England at that time. And so it wasn't even like a sport that you really aspired to be in as a woman because of that. But now obviously that has changed dramatically, and women's football in England is growing it like exponentially. So it's kind of like I only see that then as women see it as a career that they can go into outside of playing too.
Yeah, definitely.
Which to me was the big thing, because I thought, wow, this is an opportunity for me to work. Like, I loved football my whole life. Never thought for one moment that I could ever work in it, because I wasn't good enough to play. There just generally weren't professional female players, and I definitely wasn't a coach. So it was kind of like, there's no opportunity for me to work in football. Then data and analysis, well, great, because that actually takes away the subjectivity of it. Because you're not being asked for your subjective opinion, you're being asked for objective. So actually, at that time when women in football was very sparse, that actually took away almost some of the scariness, I think, of employing a woman, because it's about the data and not about the understanding of the game necessarily. Now, that's a part of the role which for me is still huge. You have to have an understanding of the game. And I think but it gives you an in to then build that trust and show that you have an understanding of the game.
Yeah, definitely. So just a question on the masters that you did then, Lucy. So I know it's been a while since you did the masters, but a question I get a lot is, should I do a master's degree and all that? Because it was a conversation that I had been with myself when I obviously graduated from my undergraduate degree. Did you feel that has kind of benefited your career? When you potentially hire analysts, do you look for that as an important thing on their CV? Kind of what's your thoughts on a master's degree?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it's a really difficult one to answer, because obviously a lot of the time you need the fundamental underpinning that you get from doing a master's degree. For example, being able to go there and get access to, like for me, I learned a lot of math on mine, and got access then to various different softwares, which I wouldn't have been able to get access to without it. But I think fundamentally, as a practitioner, the most important thing is you're looking for experience. You're looking for people who have, say, a master's degree teaches you the practicalities of it and the fundamentals, but it doesn't actually give you the actual practical work experience of it. And I think that's what we're always craving as people in the industry, is knowing that you can come and work in this environment. I think that's massive. Whenever we speak about football clubs and hiring people, can you work in the football environment? With the demands and the stress of the day-to-days, of the head coach, of the pressure of winning, of the characters of a locker room. And so I think, like, actually more important than having a degree to me, especially in I'd say like video analysis, is more about your experience as a person and your ability to understand the game, and your experience in using the specific softwares and stuff that you would want to use at a club. if you're going into as a data analyst, it's a totally different. Yeah, you need to go and do a master's degree, and actually, I would employ a data analyst who was non-football specific. Like that doesn't bother me as much. If I've got the football knowledge, I need them to be able to be good at data. So that's where I think is a bit of a grey area now. And I honestly think that most people, when they're looking at CVs or resumes, like they will look first and foremost for the experience and last at what degree they've got.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with everything you said there. So yeah, it is all about the experience. Not to obviously downplay a master's, like you said, you can learn very valuable skills, but I think a master's on its own is never going to really be enough if you want to get into a club. I think the experience is very, very, very important. So just jump into Reading then, Lucy. What was the department looking like at that time? Were you kind of who were you the only analyst going in there? Who were you kind of working with on the first team level?
Yeah, so when I first joined, I was the only analyst. So it was just me. I took over from Steve Brown, who went to Everton, I think. And yeah, it was just me at the time. I had like an intern, a work. It was kind of like more of a work experience than an intern because I think he was paid. Jason Lawson, who I went on to work with for a number of years at Reading, and who outlasted me at Reading for many years.
Jason was when I interned at Sheffield United. Jason was at Sheffield United, so I know Jason.
Okay, there's a small world, right? Yeah, I remember. So he was at Sheffield before he came to us at Reading. So, I was. So Jason was there, and Jason really looked after kind of the reserve team for me, so that I could kind of focus really on first team. As we kind of progressed and developed over the years, I was able to add an extra member of staff. So Jason became full-time, and Jason was then kind of working alongside me in first team, as well as like helping with the reserves and stuff. And then over time, we were able to bring in interns and work experience placement and kind of build out the department that way. And obviously, I think looking back at times now, when we're in the Premier League, I think we probably had a department of, four or five full-time members of staff. So we were quite well established at that point. And yeah, it's funny, you look back and you go, God, how did I do that as a one-man band? Because it was really interesting, myself and Jason took on a real, we became very very kind of split in terms of the opposition analysis at some point. So Jason would look after opposition and almost became opposition analyst. So that was totally his field and his domain. And I focused then purely on first team, which I think a lot of clubs have since followed that model, and it's very popular now. I know some clubs work with a kind of one-on-one-off system of you do everything for one game, pre-match, post-match. I do everything for the next game, pre-match, post-match. So I think there are different ways of working, but I think now it's very rare for a club to have anything less than 2 or 3 full-time members of staff now, which say when I look back and think that I did it by myself for a period, it's just like, oh my God, that's why I didn't sleep. That's why I did. That's why I worked 24 hours a day and never slept.
Definitely. That's interesting. So then obviously I'm presuming you worked with different managers at the time and throughout your spell there. So you mentioned Steve Coppell. What other managers were there when you were there, Lucy?
Yeah, so Steve Coppell was there for a year. Then Brendan Rodgers came in. So I think he was there for 7 or 8 months. And then Brian McDermott. And Brian, I worked with. Brian, I think, was the manager there for, God, a good 2.5 years, maybe. We got promoted to the Premier League. So had some fantastic times, obviously, under him. And then Nigel Atkins came in after Brian. Again, just and all of these people I've worked with are just totally different, totally unique in how they work, and how they are as coaches and managers, what they want from an analyst, what they expect, how they do pre-match, how they do post-match. It's like whenever you change manager, it's like you as an analyst went and got a new job, because they're all totally unique in how they work. But I was so fortunate in all of them, just great practitioners, great coaches, educated me and so many different facets of the game and sides of the game and different playing styles and philosophies and say different needs for analysis. So you then as an analyst have to think differently and work differently. But good people, And I think that's the most important thing, just good people. So I was very lucky that I got to work with a lot of good people and good managers in that time, and say not just in terms of their tactical knowledge of the game, but just as human beings.
Yeah, that's good. So then did you move midway through your time at Reading to more of a recruitment role there then, Lucy?
Yes, so it was towards the end of my time at Reading, kind of like, I think as most analysts do, you start to like get to your 30s and you're like, I can't, you're like, I just don't know how many more years I can do this. And I think naturally we a lot of analysts transition over to scouting because it just makes perfect sense. You become like an absolute Bible of knowledge, don't you, on players, especially in that league that you're in, because you're watching them week in, week out for opposition analysis. And so, yeah, I naturally kind of transitioned over to a scouting and kind of role. And I was really only doing that for maybe 6 to 8 months before I moved on. But yeah, it's kind of like it was like a lifestyle change kind of decision as well. And I loved it, to be fair. I loved being a first team analyst, but then I loved being able to delve into kind of player scouting and recruitment again, which is obviously what I started at Watford.
Yeah, definitely. Because when I was at before I just do what I do now, spent some time at Brighton. I did first team analysis for half the season. I then shifted over to recruitment, and I preferred the recruitment, to be honest. I really did enjoy that kind of side of the game. Like you say, just looking for players and sifting through data and stats. It was really interesting. So I do kind of encourage people, if there are analysts, to at least be open to that side of the game as well, because it may be something that you step towards as you kind of go throughout your career.
Oh, massively. Yeah. I think it's a massive avenue, like, of say people who have a drive to be a first team analyst, like it's probably because they have a passion for football. And a passion for watching games and providing input to team and helping the team become successful. And you get that same level of input and kind of, I guess, impact in scouting and recruitment as you do in first team analysis. Yes, it's a different way of working, but it's equally as rewarding, especially during a transfer window when you get one over the line.
Yeah,
and transfer window day closes. That's the best.
Definitely. So that's really interesting, because it is actually an interesting point. I put something out on my LinkedIn in terms of the lifespan of a first team analyst. It was interesting because I was just sat thinking of all the analysts that were in kind of first team roles when I was in that kind of role. None of them are really in that role anymore. Either they've totally left the game or they've gone on to be scouts, heads of recruitment, and different things. So it is kind of often said that it's a lot of hard work. Obviously, first team analyst, you're traveling a lot, you're spending a lot of time working, and it's kind of one of them things that maybe you do fancy a bit of a lifestyle change as you do kind of get a little bit older. And it does seem like a natural movement over towards the scouting and recruitment side.
Yeah, and that's not to say by any stretch of the imagination that scouting and recruitment is an easy job or
no,
a
definitely
less
not.
stressful job. And
Yeah.
you say you definitely do the same you work a lot of hours, but yeah, a first team analyst, that is brutal. And in all honesty, I don't think first team analysts are given the respect that they deserve, because it is an incredibly difficult job, and it involves just so much work and time, and in season, out of season, it's constant. And it would be nice to see that position given a little bit more kind of respect, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, at least with the recruitment, you've got like the transfer windows kind of give you a little bit of structure, but with this, the first team, can be games twice a week for months on end. So it's just one never ending cycle, and it can be very, very difficult. So shout out to all the first team analysts that I'm not getting much sleep, to be fair. So
and getting sleep.
So then let's talk about the move over to the MLS, and obviously the first club that you went to in the MLS. So were you actively looking for something over there? How did that actually come about in the first place?
Yeah, I wasn't actively looking to leave England. I felt at the time I probably needed to leave Reading. I'd been there a long time. I felt very comfortable there and had great relationships with the people there. And I felt almost I could stay there for probably the next 10, 15 years and be happy. But as I said, was kind of hitting 30 and really felt like I needed to push myself and challenge myself in different ways. So felt that I needed to probably move on from Reading, and had never thought of MLS for 1 second. Like I'd never watched an MLS game.
Yeah.
The perception of MLS at the time was poor in England. And it was only really through a mutual contact, somebody I knew at Opta who said to me, "Oh, have you thought about MLS?" And I was like, no, not really, no. And he actually put me in contact with Darren Eales at Atlanta, and said, Atlanta are building a team from scratch, new franchise, have a chat with Darren. They're looking for a recruitment analyst. So kind of got on a call with Darren Eales, and he explained the vision of the club, what they were going to be doing, what their philosophies were as a team and as a club, but also showed me obviously their infrastructure in terms of what they were looking to build with the stadium, the training ground, and you just couldn't not be blown away by it and want to be a part of that. And the job role itself being quite literally to build a team, to build a whole roster from scratch. You just don't get that opportunity in football. So to go there and be given that remit, which I went to Atlanta January 2016. We didn't come into MLS until March 2017. So we had a year to build a whole team. And it was an incredible experience, and probably the best decision I made of my life in terms of just taking myself out of English football. And to say I got a lot of criticism at the time for a lot of people in terms of like throwing my career away by leaving England and going to MLS. And it's been incredible being over here, the growth of the league, the development of the league, and to be a part of that has been really, really good. But also just to honestly take yourself out of the bubble of English football, which I was consumed with. I was totally like, the be all and end all of life for me was getting into the Premier League and staying in the Premier League. And to actually come out of that and realize that football is just as competitive. You get exactly the same buzz from winning a game and from becoming champions as you do in England in another league was really refreshing.
Yeah, you've said the word roster and locker room. You've really converted over there, haven't you, Lucy?
Americanized. I apologize. Yeah, we'll be throwing them in throughout this. There'll be all my Americanisms in there. I'll throw in soccer eventually as well. But roster, locker room, jerseys, I'm sure it's going to come out at some point. So
So then the role over there then was it sounds like you kind of built the kind of department, had a big influence of it. What kind of things were you noticing as the main differences between analysis within England and then in the MLS? Were there many differences, and was it far behind or in front? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't as advanced as in England. From purely a first team analysis perspective, obviously we didn't come into league until 2017, but I was quite kind of like involved with our first team analysis setup when we came in. And the facility, like the infrastructure for analysts on a day-to-day in terms of in stadiums at match day, was just nowhere near what it was, especially in the Premier League, but even in the Championship. And we've made some inroads there. I still think we have a way to go in MLS in terms of that side of things, but yeah, it was certainly wasn't as advanced, and in terms of the staffing in general. Typically even now in MLS, you get departments and a first team analysis department of one person, maybe two, and maybe the second person is doing it as their first ever job. And so it's still quite understaffed, I think, in that sense. From the data analysis side of things, it's funny, right? Because we see America as a very data-driven country, especially in sports, and especially when we look at basketball and American football and ice hockey and all these other sports. Baseball, obviously, Billy Beane, it's where it all came from. But soccer, MLS, the data side of things, I think is still in most clubs behind England. There are some clubs which have fantastic departments and fantastic individuals who have really, I think, set the bar and put a standard in for the league. But as a whole, I think we're still a little way off.
Yeah, because that was my next kind of question leading on in terms of the role of data in modern days. Obviously, you use data even way back at the Watford thing in terms of that. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on kind of how data is currently used and what's maybe coming up in the future with more technology, and how that's going to improve or change the role of the analyst really kind of over the next few years.
Oh, it's changed massively. I think the use of data, like, gone are the days when we wanted to know how many passes somebody made or how many tackles they made. It's for me, it's become much more complex than that. And obviously, even beyond like XG and all of those kind of models, you're talking really about sequential data now and patterns of play and actually players impacting other players. And I think that's when it gets really complex, is like to actually talking about relationships and using data to kind of really establish those things, which I say, again, more sequential kind of forms. Obviously, think the big one that we've always tried to kind of like look at is off the ball behavior and off the ball data in moments where you actually do nothing, you've got no contact with the ball, and how can we actually analyze performance in that way? I think that will continue to be an important part of analysis and how it kind of grows. But I think obviously the more that technology advances and develops, we're talking about, predictive performance. And I think that's the most important thing now, especially from a scouting perspective, in terms of being actually able to predict a player's performance, whether that be moving from one country to another, or one league to another, or one style of play and team philosophy to a different team philosophy and style of play, to actually going, okay, well, what does their age curve look like? What do we expect their performance to be in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, based on all the information that we've got now and that we've acquired previously? So I think forecasting for future, and say AI models, which actually do the hard work for you and allow you then to spend time assessing the data rather than having to write code and spend your time actually building the data sets, is going to be really important. And then I think off the back of that as well, looking the other way. So using the data that we've gathered from years ago, and this is massively right in player development and academy players, like how do we see what the 15-year-old who came through our academy and made it to first team and we sold to whatever club for $10 million, like what was he doing as a 15-year-old and what did he look like, and how do we then replicate that find that in our current 15-year-olds? So I think that changes the dynamic of analysis and where it's going in those two different ways, like especially in terms of scouting and predictive performance, but also then in what we're doing to develop players at a younger age. And that impacts scouting, right? Because if you've got that player in your academy who is 15 and is hitting all the benchmarks that you expect a 15-year-old to then become a successful first team player, that impacts your scouting process and what you're looking to do from a scouting perspective, because you don't want to buy over that player. So it's kind of all interlinked, but I think it becomes a lot more kind of scout based and kind of driven by that than necessarily first team performance.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, for someone kind of just starting out in their analysis journey, Lucy, what would you would you be able to give some advice for someone that's maybe not come from a data background, just to get that introduction and dip the toe into the data side of things, if it's not their kind of main forte?
Yeah and no. I think there are some incredibly sophisticated and well-educated data scientists and analysts now. And I think when clubs are looking to fill those positions, they're going to go for people with extensive experience in Python and all these data kind of programming systems. And that's fine. That's a different job. Because as I said, I think almost in that role as well, you don't even need to have a football knowledge. Like you can come from a totally different background, but your skills may be more in data mining, data engineering, and all of that kind of stuff. I think what is better is to excel and focus your efforts and time on what you're good at, which can be data analysis rather than data science. And that's actually learning the art of interpreting data, communicating it, because that is fundamentally the most important part of data analysis, in my opinion, is how you communicate the data to people who are going to make decisions. Because, with all due respect, a data scientist and the language they speak is not relevant to a technical director or a general manager who's making the decision on signing players. And so I think for anybody who's not well versed in sophisticated data analysis, you don't need to be. You need to, or data kind of science, I should say. I think the important part is focusing on what your skill set is, and that could be data analysis and communication, or it could be scouting. It could be subjective and actually focusing on that side, because that's a different side and a different type of analysis, but equally as important.
Yeah, definitely. So just on your LinkedIn profile, Lucy, you mentioned while you were at Atlanta, you used data for the recruitment of a head coach, and also you came up with a player grading system. Are you able to share anything around either of those topics?
Yeah, of course. So the kind of player grading system, I think that's quite kind of becoming quite standard in clubs now, where as a club, you obviously know your exact style of play, your principles of play, and as a result, you should be able to generate positional profiles from that. And then within each positional profile, I think you then know the parameters that you think are important for that position from a statistical point of view, and you can then use those to actually build out a kind of one metric number. Maybe you take 10 or 15 KPIs and you get to an end goal, and obviously you can weight those KPIs all differently, all kind of common kind of place things now in analysis, and it allows you to really identify and focus on players who are relevant to your playing style in your team, which many data providers can't provide because they're a generic tool. They have to just be generic to be able for every club in the world to be able to use. And this is where I almost come back to what I said in terms of data analysis and your interpretation of the data being important, because what is an important stat or an important number for one club may not be for another club based on their philosophies. So we really built out a system at Atlanta where we were able to identify players that really specifically fit our profile and playing style. And that was really important. And then in terms of the head coach, I think that's becoming a little bit more commonplace now as well. Really using data to identify. I think for us, it was really around styles of play. And again, we were very clear. We had a very strong identity in terms of what our playing style and philosophy was. And we wanted to recruit a coach that would fit in with that. So we used data in that way, but also to assess other things like their contribution or how they kind of brought young players into first team football and the kind of minutes that young players would get and how they would manage that. So we used it in that way as well, which again, at the time, I think you're talking, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was probably relatively new at that time. But I think now there are some really sophisticated systems and platforms that allow you and really can contribute to you in your kind of head coach search. Using data. It's impressive. Some of the stuff I've seen recently has been really impressive, actually.
No, it's because it just doesn't really make sense, does it, when a new coach comes in and then it's kind of all changed. They're not the same kind of coach that they were previously, so it does make sense to kind of have a club philosophy and then the coach can slot in and it kind of fits nicer together. So that's really interesting. So
for me, that's the most important part. Like for me, if you don't have that club identity and philosophy and you just change coach and have a different playing style every year, how do you scout players? How do you scout players for next year when you're going to have a different head coach who has a different playing style and philosophy? So it drives your whole process. It drives your whole process, or it should.
And just obviously in the recruitment side, when you said, one stat for one team might be beneficial to them, but not to another, but also then, just because one player is producing them stats in that team over there, it doesn't mean he's going to replicate in your team. Because again, it's just, there's lots of variables to think about. And obviously data helps to make the decisions a little bit more informed. So you were there for over 5 years at Atlanta. Lucy, does that sound about right? So then you moved on to DC United. So how did that come about? Was that kind of, and that was you weren't originally, did you go straight in as general manager there?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So how did that come about then? And kind of what are the differences between the general manager role and the role that you kind of had at Atlanta?
Yeah, so came totally out of the blue, if I'm being honest. Yeah, DC were looking for a general manager, and they felt that I would be a good fit for them. I think probably, based on my kind of experience at Atlanta and obviously over in England as well. Where we'd been successful both at Reading and Atlanta, had success in MLS. And it's the general manager role in America is the equivalent of technical director, or sporting director in England. So it is totally different to what I was doing at Atlanta, which was head of analysis and recruitment, where you're very specific on one subset of the football club, which is scouting and recruitment, and analysis. This was general manager is really managing all aspects of the football club, from the day-to-days of dealing with the head coach and the players, to actually then the bigger concept of transferring players, buying, selling players, acquiring them, obviously bring them into the team and kind of managing their day-to-days. But it's dealing with agents, it's contracts, it's reporting to the board, it's managing the budgets of every department, and you're responsible for medical. I mean, and I was responsible for medical, performance analysis, sports science, everything kind of first team, mental health, and all of those facets, and you're suddenly responsible for really managing the operations of the whole club, and the people management. And that's the probably the biggest difference is you really have a strong emphasis and onus on managing people and managing your staff, which I enjoyed. I really loved that part of the job. I also loved getting to actually then execute on transfers and be the person who would, get the deal done, as you were to say, or whether that's player coming in or out. Really kind of getting involved in those later stages is a big part of the job, and one that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, cool. So then you've mentioned obviously you're kind of overseeing basically the whole club, but who were the main key relationships that you would have as a GM? So I'm presuming the first team manager, maybe the club owner. Did you have anything to do with that person? What were, in terms of day-to-day, who would you spend your most time with?
Oh yeah, 100% the head coach. I think that's the most important relationship with a technical director, GM, is with the head coach. I very much see it as being your job to help them succeed, and give them the ability to focus on their job, which is coaching the team, and kind of trying to put them in the best position to be successful, by making sure they have the right players, by making sure that the facilities are correct, by taking a stress off their mind with regards to everything else other than coaching the team. And you have to be totally aligned, and that doesn't mean you don't have disagreements, and maybe you disagree on a player that you want to bring in, but it's about working together, and it's about coming and having a common identity and philosophy, with regards to playing style, with regards to the management of the team, and the days and working together to try and produce and provide the best environment for players. So I think that relationship is key, because ultimately as well, you need each other to be successful. If one's successful, the other probably is, and vice versa. So that relationship to me is the most important. Yes, you report directly to ownership and board level as well. So obviously being a general manager, say your responsibilities are, a head coach will think in the short term. We'll think about winning the next game and winning the league now. As a GM, you have to think more about the medium to long term and succession planning and budgets and all of those kind of things. And so you have a more complicated, I think, kind of set of issues to deal with in that sense, and a different mindset. You have to be able to take a step back from the emotion of today's game or this week's game, and really look at the bigger picture for the whole club, whether that be financially, whether it be about results, whatever it is. You really have to be able to be in two camps in that sense. And I think my experience is being a first team analyst and living on the road with the coaching staff for 8 years really helps me, in that GM role, to be able to do that, to know the stresses, the frustrations, the day-to-days of and being in the trenches in that sense. But now in this role, you really have to be able to take that, understand what a coach and his coaching staff are feeling, but then look at it from a more a business perspective at times as well. And I think that's key. And that's obviously when you're reporting to ownership and that kind of thing, that's where you're coming at more on those lines. So those are the two key relationships, but equally as important to those, and I'd say I echo it again, is management of all staff. And you really have to try and build relationships with for me, every member of staff in your football club, because you want them to succeed. And as I said, if they're successful, they make the team successful. And if everyone's doing their job well and is happy and motivated, then it's going to be a much more productive environment. And so for me, making sure you have good relationships and strong relationships across the board is really important.
Yeah, perfect. Good answer. And two questions on the back of that, really, Lucy. So firstly, the head coach now is Wayne Rooney. Obviously, pretty much everyone knows who that is. So you spent obviously a bit of time working with Wayne Rooney. So can you give a bit of a description as to kind of what it was like working with Wayne and kind of how your relationship was at that point?
Yeah, I think as with every coach I've worked with, we had a really good working relationship. Communication for me is key, and I think we communicated really well on a daily basis. Wayne is a real people person coach. He's got just excellent skills in terms of how he manages people. Obviously, he understands the game tactically perfectly, and obviously has exceptional knowledge there. But in terms of being able to get the best out of people and being able to manage people, which I think when we talk about coaching now, it's not just about what you do on the training pitch and how you set your sessions out and what your tactics are. The position now is about managing people. And to Wayne's credit, I think he's fantastic at that. But yeah, we had a really good relationship. As I said, as I did have with all the coaches I've worked with, and because that to me is the most important thing. And did we agree on everything? No. But do we find ways to work together and come to good conclusions? Yes. And I think he's got a really bright future in coaching and management. Obviously, he said himself he's still new to it and he's learning. And I think, he's got a very good support staff with him as well, which I think for every head coach is equally as important. And yeah, I really have no kind of doubt that he'll go on to be very successful, because I think he strikes both balance as well in terms of the on the field stuff, but more importantly as well, the off the field stuff, which in this day and age is so important.
Yeah, interesting. So obviously one of your roles...
His banter is rubbish, so I'll add that in.
Sorry?
He's got bad banter. I'll be honest, it was kind of weird because I'd worked in America for so long and I'd always had like Spanish non-English coaches. Tata Martino at Atlanta, Gabriel Heinze at Atlanta, Hernan Losada at DC, Frank de Boer at Atlanta. So actually to come back and get an English coach again just felt totally different. It's really, you don't realize it until it happens, but there's just the commonality of language and football language that I didn't even realize was a thing. I then was like, wow, you just talk differently. So it was actually really refreshing at the time to work alongside an English coach again, just because of that kind of connection. So I really enjoyed my time working there with him.
Perfect. So one responsibility you obviously have as GM is the budgeting and kind of bringing players in. So I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about the salary cap over there. So kind of if you can give a kind of idiot's explanation of kind of what kind of rules you have to stick to and kind of just a little bit more information on that, if possible.
Oh my God, I could literally sit here for the next 3 days and try and explain the salary cap to you. So in essence, you have a certain cap of money that you can spend on players, which in addition to that cap, you then get kind of league money to spend to kind of manage your cap. It's called TAM and GAM over here. And you can apply that money to players' contracts to try and bring their number down so that you are roster compliant, i.e. within the salary cap. Does it add a parity to the league? People say it does. In my opinion, it doesn't, because you have, outside of that salary cap, you have 3 designated players. Those 3 designated players you can pay whatever you want for them in transfer fee. You can pay them whatever you want on your salary cap. They're only going to hit your cap at a certain number. So you will have some clubs and some owners who will happily go and spend 10, 15 million on a DP player in transfer fee and pay that player $7 million a year in salary. Another club will only spend 1 million on the transfer fee of a designated player and pay them only 1.5 million a year. So it's a very different quality of player you're getting. So that creates a non-parity in the league, as does some other rules in terms of there are certain initiatives now which allow you to go and spend more money again on younger players. And that's all about the structure of your cap and how you work that. But really what it means is that clubs who have owners who want to go and invest more money can. So whilst there's a cap, which is meant to create a parity, it doesn't necessarily work that way. But within the cap and within the roster kind of guidelines and mechanisms, there are certain means by which you have to acquire players. So you've all probably heard of the various drafts in MLS, whether it's player coming through college, whether you trade them from the other team. There's something called an expansion draft, where whenever a new club comes into MLS, they get to pick 5 players and draft 5 players from other teams. So there are various kind of mechanisms within the draft that you have to acquire players by. And that adds a level of complexity to it, certainly. There are various other rules as well, which just make it's funny because I look at it and I think in European football or worldwide football, really the scouting process and the acquisition of a player is club wants player. Club B wants to, selling club wants to sell the player. Player wants to move from current club to new club. The deal finds a way to get done, assuming obviously the monies are right. Over here, that chain just can get broken by so many different kind of mechanisms of the not the cap, but of the kind of MLS rules. So you have to discover a player. If they fit a certain category of player, you have to discover them. If another club has already discovered them, you are not able to sign that player. So it's there are little rules like that which make it quirky. You have so many international spots that you're allowed. So each club is only allowed 8 international players, which is anybody who's not a US permanent, a US passport holder or a green card holder. But they're tradable. So you could trade away 2 of your international spots and only have 6, and another club could have 10. So all of these little dynamics play massively into the scouting process and really and that's where it becomes a puzzle in MLS. And that's what I love about it. I love finding ways to build the jigsaw and work the jigsaw kind of thing. And that's where analysis becomes really important in MLS as well, because you really have to think about player value and efficiency, and how they're going to hit your cap and the value of that to your cap. And that's where I think data and analysis becomes even more important. And obviously as well over here, the salaries of all players are made available and they're public. So suddenly data analysis, you can really look at player efficiency, certainly within players within the league, because you know what they earn. So it adds a completely different dimension to data and analysis and how it can be used to impact the scouting process. But oh god, the roster salary cap and all of that, it's literally there's some good literature on it, to be fair. Like, anyone interested in learning more about it should really check out, like, on the MLS website, MLS.com. They have the salary cap rules and regulations and the roster and budget guidelines, and it gives a really good overview. You need to read it at least like 8 times, like, for it to for bits to set in, but it's a really good kind of overview of what the league's about.
Perfect. Good answer. I'll check that out. And it makes your job a hell of a lot harder than if you've got all the little nuances in the different rules and stuff. So
It does, but it's almost more exciting as well.
yeah,
Honestly, there's times where you'll pull your hair out over it, and it becomes the most frustrating thing because you can't sign a player because another club has already said that they've
yeah,
got discovery on him, and there's nothing you can do about it.
yeah.
But at other times, it works for you, and that's when you get a buzz from it. So I personally love it.
Perfect, perfect. So another thing I wanted to ask you, Lucy, was just about kind of coaching qualifications in general as an analyst, because it's kind of a debate that, and another question I get asked a lot is are they important? You know, should a kind of up and coming analyst be looking to do their coaching qualifications, and kind of what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you have any coaching qualification yourself? No,
No,
same.
none. None. So obviously I'm going to be biased and say you don't need coaching qualification. Um, I think in this day and age, and again, it's really dependent on what type of analyst you want to be.
Yeah,
Because there are analysts now who are more kind of tactical analysts for clubs, or analysts or methodology analysts, where you're really almost coaching centric and coaching heavy in that respect. In which case, obviously, to have your coaching badges could be really important.
yeah,
Video at first team video analysts, I think there's a really, as we spoke about at the start, there's an element of, do they know the game? Do they understand the game? I don't think you need a coaching badge to say that you understand the game of football, but can you get more from it and improve your own knowledge through doing that? Possibly. If you wanted to go into data analysis, or scouting and recruitment, I don't personally think that having a coaching badge is going to increase your chances of getting a job or increase your ability to be good at that job.
yeah. Perfect. So it kind of leads on to the next bit really nice, actually, Lou. So a lot of the people that will watch this channel will be maybe still at university, and they obviously listen to people like yourself and, kind of aspire to be in a similar role. So what would you kind of, if you could give a bit of advice to the aspiring analyst or the aspiring scout or recruitment analyst, what kind of things would you say are important to them at their kind of early stage in their career?
I'd say, as we spoke about, experience. Make sure that you make contacts and make connections and try to get some first-hand experience with football clubs doing what you want to do. I think to have confidence in your ability of knowing the game, because the game is always about opinions. At whatever level you work at, someone's going to have a different opinion to you, whether it's on a player, on a playing style, and to not let that knock you in your belief as an analyst or as a scout is really important. And actually, I've said to my scouts before, if they present a player to me and they think they're really good, and I watch and say, no, I don't like him, and they believe in that player, come back to me.
Yeah.
Come back to me and say, no, can you watch again? And can you watch this time? Because and so I think that's important, to have a belief in your own ability to analyze the game. So I'd always say that, and you get that belief and you get that confidence through doing it, right? And I think to use current technology, use social media to your advantage. I know many people who have got into positions through the work that they've showcased on social media. So use that, but also try and tap into the people doing the job. So I know I've always been very open to kind of helping or mentoring people who are looking to get in the game, because there was a time when I needed that. And then there was a time when I wanted someone to give me half hour of their time just to talk to. So I'd kind of, recommend as well, if you can, touch base and try and get half hour of an analyst's time or a scout's time just to get their feedback, and be proactive in what you do. If you're a scout and you want to go into that industry, make sure you're watching games, and make sure you're putting together a portfolio of your work to present to people when you go to an interview, because I think that can be really, really impressive and helpful when just putting context to what is otherwise just words.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of got other videos on this channel for anyone watching on exactly that, kind of reaching out, networking, creating a portfolio. And like you said, I know a lot of people as well that have gone on from just starting out, sharing things on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they've actually found themselves, full-time jobs on the back of that. So it definitely can pay off. So in terms of, of course, your time, Lucy, I'm just kind of curious to ask you, what's your What would you say you enjoy the most about working with, and maybe a career highlight that you've had so far?
Oh my God, that is so hard. That is so hard because there's just been so like there's a few, and obviously, look, we're all in the game to win and to be successful. And so I think the times when we won the championship with Reading, and got promoted to the Premier League. Say we won it the year after we got beat in the playoff final, and that was the most soul destroying day of your life. And so to actually then win the championship the next year, and it was more of a relief, the relief of doing it, because everybody knows I think that is probably the most brutal league in the world. So to have the success there was just a really proud moment to do it with my hometown club, who I was a season ticket holder for growing up, and who my family loved and supported, and to have my family there, that was really awesome. But then to replicate that obviously in Atlanta, and to build a team from scratch, to come into a league, and then to win that league in your second season is, yeah, it's something which I look back on now and you still think, geez, like, and you know what the common denominator to both of those was? Just like the culture and the environment and the people. And in both of those teams, we just had the right people, coaching staff, players, support staff, all come together at the right time. Obviously we had skill and talent, but we had just a fantastic environment. And I think that's the highlight for me, is being a part of those environments, being a part of that, a tiny part of that process where you are successful, but working with the people, and working with great people in good environments, and having success together. It kind of creates a lifelong bond that you have. And I think that's probably the most kind of special part for me.
Yeah, there's nothing like being part of a winning team, is there, really? So
I mean,
definitely.
that's what we all go to work for every day, right? Like we all go to work because we want to become a champion, like at the end of the season. So yeah, that buzz you get from winning a game alone,
Yeah.
when you win a championship or you win something at the end of it, it's a special feeling.
Perfect. Perfect. So you've obviously given advice there, Lucy. I don't know if I do ask this question to all the guests, if you have any kind of recommendations of any books or podcasts or any kind of learnings. Don't know if you're a big reader or not. I mean, is there any kind of things that stick out to you? And it doesn't have to be sport related. Anything that takes your fancy, really.
Yeah, you know what? It's totally like over the last few months, I've really gotten into a lot of podcasts and stuff about you as a person. And so I love the Diary of a CEO at the moment. I've really listened to, and pick and choose the people that you like to listen to. They've got some great ones on there. There was one with David Moyes. And it was, yeah, it was
really good.
fantastic. But come away from the football, and there are people on there from business, from different sectors of the world, and to learn about what they've been. And you learn so much. You learn about them going through adversity, tough times, good times, morals, like how they deal with their own issues as human beings. Like I've taken a lot from that. And Simon Sinek, for me, is like, oh, it's fantastic. So yeah, none of mine are like really football related, but I've learned valuable lessons, I think, from every person that I've listened to on that platform. So yeah, that would be my recommendation if you have some free time.
Perfect. Perfect. I'll link that below. So what's next for you then, Lucy? And also where can people find you?
Oh God, where can you find me? I'm everywhere. You can't get away from me. um, yeah, obviously you mentioned my LinkedIn page, so I'm happy for say people to connect with me via there. Say I'm always being someone who likes to try and help people at the start of their careers, as you know, I was given help at the start of mine. So yeah, would suggest people connect to me via that, or my Twitter, or Instagram. It's just my name really, so you can pretty easy to find. And yeah, for me, the next challenge, just I think to find the right role. I love being a general manager. I love that space, but to find it for the right club as well. You know, I've spoken a lot about culture and people. I think whatever you go into and whatever club you work for, you know, you have to work for people, I think, that are aligned with you morally and philosophically, and you're all striving and going towards the same goal. So yeah, I think that's something which excites me to find that place. So yeah, we shall see.
Perfect. We'll look forward to seeing where you end up, Lucy. So again, thanks very much for your time. Is there anything else you want to kind of say before we wrap it up?
No, I guess just thank you for your time. And if anyone's actually got to the end of this, thank you. Thank you for listening to me rabbit on. But no, as I said, just yeah, it's I know it's a much more saturated market now in analysis. But have confidence in yourself and kind of, dream big, because I think, I never thought that I could get to where I've gotten to. I look at 16-year-old me, and to think where I am now is, yeah, I never would have believed it. So yeah, just follow follow your passion, follow your heart, and work hard. That's it. Yeah, work hard and you'll get rewards.
Perfect. That's a good way to end it. Thanks very much, Lucy. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you.